How did your interest for wildlife begin?
In the 4th grade, I wrote a paper on birds of prey. We had the old Encyclopedia Britannica, and you may not remember, but that was one of the sources of information. And I looked up falconry and birds of prey. I had a basic interest even then. But my father was a scientist. He had been to Earlham College, and he used to show us all the things in the outdoors a lot down in Albany, Georgia. But then I think I got an interest in wildlife through outdoor adventure. I was always interested in outdoor adventure.
You mentioned your dad was a student here. What was it that brought you to Earlham? Was it that family connection?
Yeah, it was. And we belonged to the Quaker religion. And we were in Washington, D.C., and I went to Westtown School, which is also a Quaker school. I have 4 brothers, and they all ended up going to Earlham because of my dad, I think. And so it's been a family tradition, yeah.
During your time here at Earlham, what helped you in staying active in pursuing your interests?
Well, first of all, Earlham is strong in the natural sciences. And they did have this museum back there. Not too many colleges would have a natural history museum, even now. And this was always very likable and exciting, you know, to see a mastodon sitting up there in the window. But I think what it was, Earlham gave you the opportunity to pursue your interests and be a little flexible like you can in a liberal arts college. You can get a broad education. You don't have to specialize right off the bat. And you had wonderful professors here who, in biology and zoology and geology, we had a very sort of a well-known professor there. So I got a grounding in the sciences fairly early on.
What advice would you have for any current students here at Earlham that want to turn their passion into a career?
Well, first of all, the passion is the important part. Try to figure out, you know, what really you enjoy doing, and then see if you can convert that into something that's realistic and practical and makes sense. But my father told me when I came to Earlham, I think he knew that I was really keen in the natural sciences. But he said to me, of all things, I should learn speech, vocab study, and English. And that's because as a scientist, he knew that if you can go out and do research and do a lot of science, but if you can't communicate that, it holds you back. So I didn't really think a whole lot about why it was important to develop the ability to speak and to communicate with people, but later on in life, I started realizing why he had said that about Earlham. It's very true, very true.
And his advice, did that help you with television, with broadcasting and public speaking?
Well, I think it did. I had a somewhat of an Indiana accent, and in broadcasting, that's a pretty good deal. Tom Brokaw and various other Midwesterners are often the ones that are the interviewers and have live talk shows. I think what got me really into it is that I had this passion about birds of prey, and I slowly began to develop knowledge about them that I was comfortable enough with to try to communicate. That's another trick to doing that, to being a communicator. The more knowledge you get, the more confident you are that you have something to say. So you don't have to fake things, you speak from your own experience.
And you mentioned confidence. How nerve-wracking is it to take a wild animal onto the set of The Tonight Show?
Well, if you really thought about it, you'd think this is pretty dumb. First of all, you have to know the animal, and you have to know what the capabilities are, what might be dangerous, and what I don't look at animals as being dangerous. I look at them in the point that I respect them, and that I know the personality, I know the behavior generally, and I can usually control the animal, or I wouldn't take him on, or it, or whatever. You know, there have been a few cases where things have gone a little bit too far, but generally I've been able to handle that because I've been around long enough to know the behavior.
What is the fine line on television dealing with animals? I'm thinking especially The Tonight Show with Johnny Carson.
Oh, yeah.
It seems like they enjoy something going awry. But what's the fine balance between, of course, you don't want to hurt Johnny, but you do want something funny to happen. How does that happen?
Here's the point. You're right about that. But on the other hand, I'm not the kind of guy that just wants to go on and fool around and make somebody scared. I want to have a message that I can get out. Trouble is, I only have about 2.5 minutes at the most, maybe a minute and a half, to say something of value. And then when I bring the animals out, nobody's going to listen to you anyway. You have to follow what happens. And on the Johnny Carson show, he's so sharp that I had to be very careful and listen very carefully to what he was saying. I wasn't playing to the audience. In fact, if something was going well, then I could hear the audience have a deep laughter, like a belly laugh. I knew it was going well. That's one of the things you learn. You pay a lot more attention to your host who's there relating to you than you do to the audience. It's scary to do something like Johnny Carson, especially with an animals. In one extent, you got to be a little bit dumb to do it because you know darn good and well if I have a big snake or let's say 100-pound mountain lion or something like that, the worst thing to do is to have an animal that looks uncomfortable to the audience. So you got to be prepared, and you got to make sure that you're handling your animals correctly on television because you got an audience of several million people. And once I was on with an animal that was called a Celebes ape with Johnny, and Celebes ape is one of the worst looking animals there is. It's got black mohawk hairdo and big teeth and size like a baboon, but they could be very dangerous. Now, I knew this animal. I had worked with it once before, but never on Johnny Carson. And I knew I had to be careful. So what occurred to me is that when I get out there, I only have, 3 or 4 minutes to make the audience accept the animal. And I got to make sure nothing happens, of course, to hurt Johnny or to make Johnny uncomfortable. So it's a real issue. And on this particular occasion, I was sitting backstage ready to come out. The trainer came by. I was sitting outside the curtains waiting to go in. The trainer came by and said, "Jim, I was hesitant to bring Doc here because he's reached the state of puberty, and now he's competitive with other males. And now if some other male looks him in the eye, he takes it as a threat, and he could go wild." And I said, "Boy, thanks a lot. Here I am right behind the curtains ready to go on. You're telling me that?" Well, I knew he was going to consider Johnny as another male. So anyway, they called me, and I didn't have a chance to do anything except walk out with Doc. Doc had a mohawk hairdo. He had a terrible look on his face, and I knew he was aggressive. So Doc jumps on a table. I didn't want to put him on Johnny's table because he would have just torn up all Johnny's memorabilia, but I knew he would do a war dance on the table. And sure enough, he was picking up chairs and throwing them across the room and just going crazy. The audience loved it. But before I knew it, Johnny came over and bent down and made a face at Doc, had eye contact. I only had time to jump aside and pull the leash of Doc because he actually landed on Johnny, jumped 6 feet through the air, and slugged him in the face. And boy, I thought, my goodness, this isn't going to work. So then Johnny, if it had been Merv Griffiths would have tippy-toed out of there. Johnny came back with a karate chop and challenged Doc, right? Well, now you can see the red flames coming out of Doc's eyes. And Doc came through the air about 6 feet and slugged Carson right in the chin. Would have probably brought blood if I hadn't got him out of there, but then I got him away from Johnny, and I put Doc down in one of the chairs, and if I had looked at Doc myself, had eye contact, he might have attacked me. So I was very careful not to look at Doc because that's a challenge.
For a lot of people, it was Mutual of Omaha's Wild Kingdom. Now there's a proliferation of shows dealing with wildlife and nature. And what do you think of the state of that today?
Well, there's several things. Some of these things are very exploitive. I don't want to be involved with programs that don't have content, that are not worthwhile. And so I'm pretty selective. But there are some guys that realize that they can get pretty well known by coming out with an animal on television. And a lot of it is the wrong way to do it, in my opinion. You don't want to come out and just try to throw an animal out on somebody's desk and scare them, but some people do that.
This is the end of the school year. Pranks are abound. When I hear your name in Earlham circles, there's always something about a cat falling on a speaker. I don't know.
Well, you got to have a little fun in life.